Okay, so we've got two identical panels and we're going to flip them side by side, and then we're going to make what's called some infill panels because we need an extra section at the back, so there's room from each shoulder edge around our neckline. So how we do that is flip them side by side. And for the purposes of joining, you just need to decide, well, obviously this one's going to be my left side. That's going to be on my left shoulder and arm. And this one's going to go on my right shoulder and arm. And so what we need to do is widen that and put in an infill to join these two back panels. So to do that, we're just going to do some extra rows of double crochet clusters, and we're going to do about 2 inches either side. So I've measured that, and that'll be about 3 rows each side. So we'll start with one side, we'll do 3 rows on that, we'll do 2 rows on the other one, and then on the third row coming back we will join as we did for the shoulder panels, the tops, as the join as you go method. So we'll get started. I'm just going to start with this panel over here, which will be the one going over my right shoulder. So I'll pop this to the side. And I'm actually going to have that on my lap because it's a bit chilly this evening. I'm going to bring this down just a bit so I can try and see what I'm doing a bit better. All right, so I put a slip stitch on my hook as usual. So again, that's going to be where my right arm is going. So that's going to be the back, and this will be the front. So we're going to just turn this and this will be the back. So not to confuse with the other side. So one side we're going to start at the top to start our rows, and the other one we're going to start at the bottom end at the waist side. So it's important that we do that because otherwise you'll end up with really weird positioning of where you've done your extensions and they won't join. So I'm going to start in this corner stitch here. That was where we joined the top, and I'm going to go into the corner stitch here, slip stitch that on. I am going to chain up 3, and I'm going to make a cluster in this very first and that will make sense because remember, we always have a cluster and then a space and a cluster and a space, cluster and a space and a cluster. So each cluster offsets each other. Even though we're changing directions, we need to have that cluster here to start. If you like, we can pop in a stitch marker so you can know where the beginning of the top of your first chain 3, where we're starting from. All right, so this side is quite short to work, so it won't take long to work up at all. 3, 4. There's only about 15 or 16 clusters to do. So we've got our first cluster, and we're going to go in and make a cluster, and don't just move your little tails out of the way. You might have a few if you don't sew them in as you're making the piece. I tend to wait till the end most of the times that I'm doing a project. Depends on the sort of project, whether or not I want to sew them in or not. Totally up to you. It's always nice just to keep going and getting the body of your work done before you sew in all your ends. All right, so oops, lost a couple of stitches. So that's how it's looking, how we start, and I'll meet you up when I get to the end. Okay, so I'm coming to the end of that short row, and there's a space there. I'll put a cluster in there. And then there's a corner at the end, so I'm going to put a cluster in there. And you can either go into the space or in the top of the chain 3. Whatever you find. Easiest there. All right, so then we're going to chain up 3, and we're going to turn our work. And we're working back the other way, so it's the way that you haven't seen yet, where that's the inside of our work. When we've been working around that side, we're staying on the same surface, the front face. Now we're going back up the other way. So this time we've got our chain 3, and we will put our first cluster in, because we always have a space, a cluster, a space, cluster. Now we're creating a space, and we've got another cluster into that space. So the space should always have a cluster underneath it. So I'm going to continue on. I've got a bit of yarn vomit. If you haven't heard of that term before, yarn vomit. Suddenly got a bit of a knot. So I'll meet you back up the end, and once I've finished sorting out my yarn vomit. Okay, so a couple of minutes to do that row and 20 minutes to undo the yarn vomit. All right, so I've got one space here to go. Finish my cluster. And as per the other end, we're going to finish in the top of that chain 3 at the beginning of the cluster with a double crochet. So that will go in there. All right, so this first part we're going to do 3 rounds, 3 rows. So I've chained up 3, and I'm now going to turn again. So this is the outside of our work, and we're going to do 1 more row to get to our desired couple of inches. So I've gone up 3 here, and I'm going to make another cluster by just doing 2 more double crochets into that space. And I'll just put a stitch marker in there, top of the chain 3, and then we'll continue making clusters to the end again, and then we will just tie off, and we're going to do the other side to add our extra infill for the back. Oops. It's a lot about crochet. If you stuff up and your hook comes off, you just whack it back on and start again. I like knitting. I've done that years and years ago, and I learnt from my mum. I just found knitting, you've got to you drop a stitch, much harder to pick up, but that just might be because of my own human error. But I do find crochet is a bit better for that when you drop stitches. All right, I'll see you when I get to the end. So I'm coming to the end of the third row of our infill, and there's the top of my chain 3, and I'm going to again, either we can do 2 into the space and then just 1, so we don't have to fiddle with that difficult stitch for the end. So we started with a cluster that end. I'm going to finish with a cluster that end. If we didn't, we'd just have a space and another space if we'd only put the double crochet in there. So we're just going to cut some yarn off here and pull that through just to give us a knot, just to secure that. And we're going to work on the other side. I'll take my stitch markers out for now, and I'll just show you how that looks. So we flick it to the side, back to the front side. That will be going over my right shoulder, and I've started at the top. I've done 1, 2, 3. I know I've tied off there because there's my tie off end yarn tail that I'll need to, I'll pop it to the side. So yeah, that's our front. That's the infill in the back, and that's going to give us a bit of length along our neck. So that's half of it, and now we need to do the other half, and then we'll join them. I'll just grab the other piece to show you. So we'll flick that round to this side. So we need to do our 3 rows. So we're going to do 2 rows, and then on the third we're going to join like we did as we joined as we went, adding in those clusters with the slip stitch there. So I'm flipping this one upside down. The last panel we started at the top at the shoulder. This one we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up. But we're working on the back panel, so you have to remember that there's your sleeve, that's the front, that's the back. So we're going to start here, but we're crocheting along the side. So if we put that in there, we know that that's going to be the back. It's going to grow when we turn it round. You can see that's the bottom. It's the bottom, and we're going to have the infill on this side. I know it's all upside down, topsy-turvy. I hope I'm not confusing you too much about where you're going to start. All right. Sorry about that, I just dropped my yarn. All right, so I'm going to put a slip stitch on the hook, and we're starting in this corner space here. Take that stitch marker out and slip that through. Just tighten it and move your tail out of the way. So we're going to do the same as the other side, chain 3, and then we're going to make our first cluster by finishing it off in that space, because we need a space between this cluster even though it's on the other side. So again, we're just going to continue. So we'll work down this side now. Like that. That's the bottom. There's the top. So we're working from the bottom towards the top now. And I'll meet you when we get to the end. Okay, we're coming to the end of the row, the first side of the back infill. And we started with a cluster. So we want to end with a cluster. So that was the corner, that was the two joining at the shoulders, the meeting of the clusters. 1, 2, 3, but there's a corner here. So let's put in a cluster here. Chain up 3. I'm going to turn, and then we're going to work back down that same row we just came up. Put a cluster. So the tricky bit, I guess, about this part of the pattern, 1, 2, 3, is just keeping track of your stitches at the end. So use stitch markers. Continue down to the other end. So this is our second row, and for the third row we need to start joining. So once I get to the end of this row, we will turn and start to join. Okay, so this is going to be our left side. So that sleeve's going to be on our left side of our body. And we've come back down. This is our second row. I have one more space, so I will put a cluster in there. And this is where we started, so we know that was the first row going up, this one coming back. And the top of the chain 3, which would equivalent to our double crochet, we're going to put a double crochet in there to join. All right, so let's have a look at how those sides are looking now. All right, so this is the side we had 3 rows of clusters. We've done 2 now. So now we need to finish off our third row by joining to this side. So you just need to set yourself up appropriately. So I have the 2 sides together. I'm going to flip my work, grab it. So I'm working on the outside edges. So the 2 inside the 2 sides that will be the front of our cardigan, and we're going to join these 2 extra rows at the back. So that would all join. So I flipped my working side and the other side. There's the top, there's the bottom. So I'm coming from the bottom and the bottom to reach both tops on either side. So I need to have, I've got a cluster on that side, so I need a cluster on this side. So I'm going to chain up 3. I'm going to join to that first, sorry, all those tails are in the way. I guess it's, well, it's better to weave them in rather than leave them. And now that I've joined to the top of the chain 3 on the other side and I've done my chain 3, I'm going to finish my cluster on this side. Now that all seems a bit confusing, but it's just to get going on this first one. So those clusters will join up. So I chained 3, joined it to the top of the chain 3 on the opposite one, finished my cluster in the hole into the space like we have been doing, chain 3, finish off your cluster. Now that I'm up to the, this has taken me to row 3, which is equivalent to the row 3 over that side. I'm going to go from behind, which is actually the outside of my work, and I'm going to grab my yarn and pull it through and slip stitch to there. Now I'm going to do my next cluster. Oops, if I get the right tension. 1, 2, 3. So it's the second cluster on the 3rd row, and it's going to line up with the second cluster of the 3rd row on the opposite side. So go through the space and pull my yarn through. I am going to do another cluster as we have been doing. So I'm finishing off this 3rd row on this side and just attaching it and lining up the clusters from the other side. So I know it looks really confusing, and sometimes going over the one stitch out of a whole project might take you 20 minutes to sort of understand it, and the rest is just really straightforward. So joining that is one of the trickiest. So there's only a couple of really tricky places that you might get stuck and have to re-look at it. So if I just stop for a sec and show you what that's looking like. I'm lining up my clusters again by just going through slip stitching, finishing off my stitches, putting a little slip stitch around that bar of the opposite side. And if I just open this up a minute, mid-work, just to show you, you can see how that's joining again. So that will be the our back. and we've got some more space now. I hope that didn't really confuse you. I'm coming back to this side of my work again. So again, it's seaming. So if you just think about that as your spine, and we're just joining our spine together. I've got one arm coming out this side, and it's the same on the other side. Let's picture that as your spine. We're going up the center. Maybe that will remind you about what it is that we're aiming to do, joining these two pieces together. And if you think about each of your little clusters as your discs in your back, and we're just lining all of these up. And you can stop and check every now and again just to make sure that your clusters are lining up. So it's just getting your hands around how you hold your yarn, how you hold your project, and just understanding the process. And I know when you see someone else do it, it doesn't look that hard, but I have spent many, many hundreds of hours in front of my computer looking at YouTube videos, how to do things. So I'm hoping here in Oz, hearing the Aussie accent and knowing that we're using yarn that we can purchase here in Australia without worrying about substituting other yarns, that all these things will help. And I'm brand new at trying to record as I go, so you know, I've had a few dodgies along the way so far, and I've been doing it for a couple of weeks. All right, so we've almost put our spine together, and we're to the last of our discs, and as usual I've still got a hole over here to finish, but I have a cluster on that side. So remember that this is a second row and that one's a third one, so I need to finish off with a cluster on this side so that it equals the other side. And if I can get into that third stitch, which I have. Sorry, a lot of ruffling because this cardigan's catching on things. So I've just finished my last cluster here and I've got a cluster there, so I'm just going to slip stitch as best I can into the top of the chain 3, or the last double crochet and the end, and then I can pull that up and cut that off. Pull that through. So let's see how we have done. So we've put our spine together. Let's flip this over. Let me just try and get a better view. So there we go, that's what we've got, and we've extended from both sides, and apart from the seam down there, it's seamless even though we've added on these rows. And it is rather short, it's just cropped, almost like a little bolero really. And if you like the idea of that and you want to leave it that length, that's fine. I'm going to add a couple more rows, so I'll show you how to do that. And once we've done a couple more rows, just to give it a bit more length, we'll go around the whole project with single crochets just to neaten it off. So if you don't want to do the extra rows and you just want to do the single crochet, you'll just need to skip the rest of this. What I might do is do the extension rows first, stop, and then I'll start again, so you can just skip through that part. Okay, we're going to start working on adding some length to the actual body. So we need to turn it upside down. And with crochet, most of the time you start your work wherever you have the opportunity to work, starting on the front side and then coming back on the inside rows when you're turning. This is just what I've found after watching several videos and reading patterns and things, is that you tend to start working on the, what we call the good side, the right side, not the wrong side. So put some yarn on my hook, and because we've got a cluster there, I'm going to this time add our slip stitch on, move our yarn tail out of the way, chain up 2 this time, and I'm just going to put 2 double crochets in that space, and because we've only gone up 1, 2, count up 2 and put our slip stitch in. All right, so corner, a cluster and a space and a cluster. It's the rule we're following with this particular way of doing your clusters and the construction of this. There's lots of different methods of making a hexi cardigan, where you add on the extra rows and all that sort of stuff. I'm trying to keep this fairly simple so it's not too confusing. So I hope I'm achieving that. So this will be quite therapeutic. That's what I use crochet for. I find it quite therapeutic after you get through all the frustration of learning. And we're just going to continue on with putting clusters all the way along the bottom edge, and then we'll continue by chaining up to doing clusters, and we just continue that, and you can make it as long or short as you like. If you want it down to your knees, just go for your life, just keep going, making it as long as you like. Or if you just sort of want it down over your hips a bit more, just a few rows. So I'll probably just test it on me. I'm not particularly tall, so this would fit a small person in length, but I'm wider than what I've made this, so I wouldn't be able to join it with buttons, but I should be able to get it over my arms and shoulders. All right, so we've started on our row here, and we're just going to keep going. I'll just stop when we get to that middle bit just to guide you through where we're putting the stitches there. So I'm just coming to where we've done the infills. You can tell by our joining our spine there, our little clusters. So where that tail is where I've joined or tied off on one section. So just be mindful of that little tail in the way, pop that out of the way. You can crochet over yarn ends, but in this particular instance I'm not going to, just because of the way it's constructed. So that was our first cluster. Then we went up chain 3. So we're going to go around that chain 3, but we're still going into the space as per usual. Where we had the little join of the first couple of clusters, same like we did on the shoulder to the arm. I'm just going to go in the middle of that, just there. And then this will be the chain 3 that we did. I'm still going into the space, but it'll just look a bit different. And then that's where there was a corner where we started. So it might just look a bit different. We're still just going into spaces. So just let me check. So there was a corner, and then we added on our 1, 2, 3 rows. And then so we've gone around chain 3 here, just gone into the space there, gone around a chain 3 here, and we've come to the corner. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that was our 6 infill rows that we did. All right, we'll continue on just till the end. So I've come to the end of that row, and I'm going to put a cluster in this last space, because we put in clusters in all our spaces. Now, some other patterns won't do it like that, but that's just how I'm doing it. I'm going to chain up 3 and turn. So our work's getting quite bulky now. So I'm going to chain up 3 and turn, and back we go. Clusters again. All the way along. So I've come back. This is the second row of my lengthening of the cardigan, and I've come into my last space, and that was the first chain I did. I joined here and joined here and chained up. And so I put a stitch marker in just so we can recognize what the stitch looks like when it's a darker stitch, or if it's halfway on its side. And we're going to double crochet into that stitch there. So now we'll chain up again. When I'm doing the clusters, I'm going to do just chain up 2 so they're short at the end here. But when I need to jump a cluster and go into a space, I'm going to chain up 3 just for a bit more length. I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter. I could do a chain 3 here. Maybe I should just do that to keep things consistent. Sorry, just to confuse you. So when we've finished just with 1 double crochet, we know that we need to then, we can't just have a double crochet or a chain 3 above it. We want to make that a cluster, because remember our pattern is cluster, then a space and a cluster. So we've chained up and we will finish that cluster with another 2DC. So that's your pattern. We have a cluster, and on the way back we finish with a double crochet into the top chain 3. And if we finish on a double crochet, we need to have a cluster above that. So where's my stitch marker? I did go up 3, so I'll go up 3, pop my stitch marker in just so I know when I come back where the end of my row is. So I've done 2 rows. I'll probably do 4 or 6 and then I'll just see how the length is. But hopefully you don't get lost with this pattern as you're changing rows going back and forth. So I might just show you once I get to the end of this row and how I start just one more time. So I'm coming to the end of what will be the 3rd row that I have done for my length, and I am going to do another cluster here because there's a space from the row before. I'll take that out and I will do a cluster. So now I'm going to chain up 3 and turn. And I've already got a cluster here. So, and there was a space underneath. So cluster, space, cluster. So I'll need a space above that. So I'm going to go into my space there. So hopefully that makes sense about when you do your clusters and when you don't, and when you just chain up. Chain, cluster, chain. When I come back, there'll be a cluster in there, and then I'll chain up and go across. So you just need to be mindful of where you are. So hopefully that makes sense. And I'll finish off what I'm doing and I'll measure it and I'll let you know how many rows I did. So I've finished doing my length, which worked out well because I've only got this much yarn left on the ball, so that's good. So I'll start a new one to do around the edging. So this is where I joined on. That's where the Hexi cardigan from the initial 6 rounds, 6 corners we did of the, what was that? 5, 6, 7. 15. I did 15 rounds of the Hexi to get to the measurement that I needed. and I've just added on another 14, so it's about 23 inches long. And as I said, this is it's not for me, it's a size small, and the length is okay, but I wouldn't be able to do it up around the chest. I'd probably do at least a large for me. So it meant that my initial rounds that I would have done, I would have kept going a few more rounds, a few more inches. So this is a good size for a 10 to 12. And we're just going to finish it off now with doing some rounds. So I still haven't weaved in my ends. I'm just going to work around that and finish off. So I'm just going to, once again, add a slip knot. So we're just going to do some single crochets, and with the extra rows I've done, we're going to have to watch what we're doing in terms of where we put our stitches so that we have an even amount. Once we get to where the Hexi cardigan panel is, we'll be able to go into all the stitches from the clusters at the top of those. But the extra, we'll be working on the side of the clusters. So I'll show you how to do that. It just means that we need 2 single crochets in the side of every chain 2 up that we did, and 2 single crochets in a double crochet, and we just need to space those out. So as long as you decide where you're going to put your stitches in the side of a double crochet and into the chain 3 or a DC, then your stitch count will be fine. So I'm going to start in the corner, which is of the right front panel. And sorry, there's lots of yarn in there now because we've got all our cardigan together apart from just finishing off, and we're just going to crochet all the way around. And depending on not if you want to do some buttonholes, it will depend on whether or not you want to leave space for those. But the first few rows will just be neatening off, and then if you decide on the last 2 rounds you want to do some buttonholes, then you can do that. So I'm just going to get you started going around. So we've slip stitched on. I'm going to chain 1. I'm just going to go back into that chain 1 didn't count. So I'm going to do a single crochet, chain 1, and single crochet back into that. So in essence, that's going to be a corner. So every time we come around, we'll treat that as a corner, like we did with the double crochets. So I'm just looking for my stitch marker. So again, where you've done the chain 1, and then so we've got a single crochet, we've done a space, and then a single crochet back into that corner space there. So then we're going to come to this double crochet. So to tell the difference with this cluster, we've got a cluster and we've got a double crochet. That's the chain up 3, and that's a double crochet. So to go into this, it's sort of made up of a couple of parts. So there's a hole there, and then there's a strand of yarn or a stitch there. So I'm going to use that as my reference, one there and then one around that post. And we want two in this space here. So it can be tricky. Gee, I've used that word a lot. It can be a bit tricky getting into that space there, that stitch. But if you can get into and do two along there, it sort of works up a bit nicer. Otherwise, just do two around the post. Then there's that top part of the double crochet. That's actually the actually a stitch, which we would be equivalent to the top of a double crochet here. So I'm going to go on the side of that one, and then just around the post here, and then we'll do two around that post, and then we've got that little stitch that we can put one into there and that there. So we've got two per row sidewards, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to follow that. So if you just decide where you're going to put your stitches and repeat that pattern. So that's the side of a stitch of the top of the double crochet, and then I'm going to go around the post of the second part of that double crochet, and there's that would be a chain 3 up. I think I said chain 2 before, but chain 3. And again, I'm going to divide that part of the stitch into 2 and get 2 single crochets. 2 again there, 1 in there, and 1 around the post, and 2 in here, and again find where I'm putting these stitches so I can divide that up by there. And then there's a corner space, but we've already got stitches in there, so I'm just going to go straight into the top of that double crochet here, and now we've got our V's, and now we can see our V's, and we can just continue crocheting all the way up till we get to the top, and then I will show you what to do, how to negotiate getting around those corners and going back across the infill panels that we did, which will be behind our neck. So that's how that's looking so far. So I've come to the top of my cardigan, and there's the seam where the shoulders were, and the infill section is along here. So that's my cluster, and then I would have had a corner. So I'm going to put 1 stitch into where that corner was. I'm going to add 1 stitch between where those 2 clusters met. Here's a chain 2, so I'm going to do 2 into that. And here's a post of a cluster, but that looks like it was a chain 3 up, so I'm going to go do 2 in there. I'm going to try and at least get 1 into the stitch, because I don't want that to be too gapey. Pull that apart, and here's another, would have been a chain 3, and here's a cluster. So I want to try and get 2 stitches in here, 1, 2. That looks like the center of our spine now. So I'm going to put 1 here, that's in the middle, and then I'm going to do 2 in that cluster, and then we've got a chain, and I'm going to 2 around the chain, and we have a cluster. I'm going to try and get 2 into that. Let's just see where we are. I'm going to put 1 into, that was a corner space there, so I'm going to put 1 into that. There's the center of the shoulders, so that's the back panel. Coming to the left hand shoulder, I'm just going to put 1 in there, and 1 in there, and then we're back to all, we can see the V's heading back down the front of the left panel. So that's easy enough. We're just going to do single crochets under each V, so into every stitch down, and I'll meet you back up when we get to the bottom of that left front panel. So I've finished coming down the first part of the side, and this is where I have all my extra rows for my length of 14 rows. So again, let's move that tail out of the way. We're going to do 2 single crochets as evenly as we can across each side of each of those stitches. 1, 2, 2 in the around that bar or that post, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 2 again there, 2 again there, and again, because we're going the opposite direction, I've got 1 in the post, and then there is a little space here, the top of the stitch, just so that they're not all around the post. Sort of spread them out a bit. So 2 in every side. 2 around that one, and 2 around there. Now we're at the end, that's where I've tied off. 1, 2, 3, it's a bit loose, but I'm going to go into that stitch. I'm going to chain 1 and go back into it. So that would have been the top of a double crochet. That's why it's just a bit loose. That's okay, it'll tighten up as we go around. So single crochet, chain 1 and back into that stitch. Now I do want to put a stitch marker in there. I keep dropping them on the floor, so many that I've sucked up into the vacuum cleaner. All right, because I always find it hard to identify just when there's one chain, or even if there's two chains with a single crochet. So popping that in, so we've made a little corner on the edge there, and then the bottom of our cardigan, I'll try and move some of this out of the way. Dropping things on the floor. So again, because we did clusters, we've got we can identify all our stitches by the V's. So we're just going to do one single crochet into every stitch along the bottom, and that will take us back to the beginning of the panel where we started. So I'll see you back there. So I'm coming to the last few stitches and we're back round to the beginning, so that's where we started, and I've put my stitch marker in for my corner, and I've just got the last 3 stitches of that cluster to do. There's just over 100 stitches along the bottom there, single crochets. So that's 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to slip stitch to that very first stitch we made. So that was the chain one, and then I went back into that to make a single crochet. So to start each row, so if you only wanted to just do 1 row round to finish off, you could do that, pull up your yarn, cut that off, and weave that in. So I'll just see if we can see roughly what that's going to look like just with that 1 row of edging. Oh, we're all over the shop. So much yarn when you get to this point. All right, let's so when you look from this side, that's obviously going to be on the inside, and that's why we quite often say start on your outside work, because the stitches are neater on that side as opposed to on the inside. And so that will be the back of the neck there. It's much neater to look at as opposed to that side, regardless of the yarn tails there that I haven't weaved in. So if you think, right, that's all I want to do, I'm going to weave in my ends, and you've got a cardigan that you've made. So good job. But what I'm going to do is continue on and do a couple more rows. I mean, you could even have done go round and just do double crochets, so it's a thicker sort of almost look a bit like ribbing really, but it would be a thicker edging all the way around. So I've slip stitched to there. I'm not going to tie off. I'm going to chain up 1. I'm going to do a single crochet back into that stitch. Now I took my stitch marker out, and that's the chain 1 space. So I'm going to go into there, do a single crochet, chain 1, and go back into there. Now that's already confusing for me, and I do this all the time. So I've done a single crochet, chain 1. So what I usually do is put that around the chain 1 there, and then I go in and do my single crochet. Okay, so there's the space. And it's always tricky to see because when you yarn over, when you go through and pull through your stitch, you could easily mistaken that as the space, but it's hidden in there. So now that I've got that corner done, I'm just going to continue. And you don't have to worry about where your stitches are being placed now because you've set up all your single crochets on that very first round. So where I had 2 stitches into the side of every stitch, I don't have to worry about that now. So we're just going to go around and do a few rounds just to give it, bring it in just a little bit. And as I said, you can just make this without buttons. Buttonholes are pretty easy. You just decide how many buttons you want to put on. And for example, I would just do a chain 1, skip a stitch, and go into that. I'd put a stitch marker in there just to remind myself where the buttonhole is. But that's all you do. And then if I come around one more round, I'd just do 1 stitch to the top of that. But I'm not ready to do any buttonholes or anything yet. I haven't decided. So I'm just going to keep on continuing, and I'm going to do a few more rounds. And then that will be a cardigan, but weaving in all my loose straggly ends. So I'll see you at the end. So I've just finished 3 rounds of this single crochet, and I may or may not do an extra 1 or 2, see how I'm feeling. But that's pretty much it. I will take a photo and try and put it on the beginning of the video or the end. Still have to tie this off, weave in some of these loose ends, but I'm pretty happy with that. So thanks very much for joining me on my very first journey to making my very first big project and videoing the process. So hopefully there's not too much jibber jabber going on. Any issues, you can always just send me a message. And happy crocheting, and thanks for joining once again. Bye.